It's like I'm teaching, but I'm teaching the computers. Hello Musicianship 5, Caitlin and Grumpybach here, coming to you from my house. So this week's lesson is going to be slightly different. What the plan was that we were going to dance to our sarabands because we're great nerds. Obviously, you can dance at home to your saraband by yourself if you have a casual pianist in your house who can play it for you. I know some of you definitely do, so there you go, isolation sorted. But otherwise, because we can't do that in class, I'm going to do something slightly different. I'm going to do a belated International Women's Day class because I was kind of sad that I missed it, and I knew that I missed it, but you know, busy life. Instead, we're going to do that now. We're going to look at the life and work of arguably my favourite composer, full stop, Grażyna Bacewicz. What we're going to do is, this is going to be kind of a bit of a trial class for next term's lessons. So because I'm not going to be able to look at any practical work that you've been doing, at least not very efficiently, and I'm not going to be able to sit with you at a piano, go through work, say, okay, this is happening here, this is happening there. What I'm going to do is a kind of music history series, but then take music theory and we can look in depth at different things that different composers do in their style, where they are geographically, within the genres they're using, and we can kind of look at music theory that way. I'll set some questions at the end of this video and to the future videos so that you can either do a creative exercise, a bit more of a theoretical exercise, or maybe a bit more contextual stuff, because I think context is very important, and I'm a big sucker for stories about composers, their lives, how interesting they were as people or how not interesting they were, though composers are usually pretty strange. So I think it's interesting and actually quite good that we get a chance to look at that in a bit more detail. So let's dive in. The reason I've decided to focus on Bacewicz, not only is she, as I said, arguably my favourite composer full stop, but I've just had to write a massive essay because your exams might be cancelled. Mine aren't, which is entitled The Effects of Gender and Genre on the Work of Grażyna Bacewicz. So we're going to look at that a bit at the end. I've kind of dip into the realm of gender in musicology. What are the differences in genre? How does this apply to women, particularly Bacewicz? So that's all kind of quite high university level way of thinking and questioning. However, we're going to put it on a bit more of an accessible level, and I'm going to give you some biographical information beforehand, and then we can also look at some of her pieces and also the history of Polish music and music under the Soviet rule at the same time. Let's begin! So, a backstory of Polish music. Where I'm going to start is actually with another female composer, Maria Szymanowska. She was a pianist who was famous for writing nocturnes and other piano works that greatly explored a kind of romantic harmony and more virtuosic way of playing. The miniatures were very popular and greatly influenced the work of Frédéric Chopin. Now, Chopin was half Polish, half French. So whilst he was born in Poland and grew up there for a bit of his childhood, he moved to France relatively early on and is generally considered to be more of a French composer, but don't tell this to the Poles, let's be honest, he's a babe. So from Maria Szymanowska's work, Chopin then wrote his preludes, his nocturnes, and then truly started to develop the romantic piano repertoire. Chopin has left big boots to fill, and the main composer in Poland who came next was Karol Szymanowski, who's not related to Maria Szymanowska, just a coincidence. He was around in the late 19th century, early 20th century, and was in the realm as well of French music. Everyone's thinking, wow, Chopin, he did really well going to France, so I should go to France. So Szymanowski did that, he went to Paris. He was exploring the more impressionist realm, having been a contemporary of Debussy, Ravel, Lily Boulanger, and then met one of his biggest influences, Igor Stravinsky. Stravinsky is a massive figure in 20th century music. We will look at him later. So Karol met Igor and said, wow dude, I really like what you're doing, this is amazing, and since then truly managed to break away from this Chopin French sound. Stravinsky was originally from Russia but then also lived in Paris. This is important for later. If you look at the geography of Europe, if you're in Poland, you're kind of in the middle and you're surrounded by a lot of music. There was a great influence of the German school and Vienna, you know, they're all kind of neighbouring countries here in the middle of Europe. But then you have the absolute landmass that is Russia just sat there right next to you. And because Polish and Russian cultures are generally more similar than maybe some of the other European cultures, there was quite a lot of overlay there musically. So after Szymanowski came Bacewicz. Grażyna Bacewicz was born in 1909 in Łódź, Poland, where I used to live. She was born into a family of musicians. Her father was a music teacher, her two older brothers, Kiestut was a pianist and Vivace was also a pianist and composer. Bacewicz learnt the violin from a very young age as well as piano. She started doing concerts at the age of 7 with her family and was just surrounded by music her entire life. She started her musical schooling at the Academy of Music in Warsaw. The head of the Academy of Music in Warsaw at the time was Szymanowski. So she went there to study and was having a great time studying composition and violin and philosophy at the main University of Warsaw at the same time. And Szymanowski said, hey, you know what, Grażyna, just go to Paris. Everything's great. It's wonderful. Go study there. So Grażyna did as she was advised and then went on to go study in Paris. Bacewicz studied with one of the most important teachers throughout the entire 20th century, Nadia Boulanger. Now, the Boulanger name you may have heard earlier in the video, if we were paying attention, which was in the Impressionist school, Lily Boulanger. Lily Boulanger died very young at the age of 24, so whilst her compositions are amazing, there aren't tons of them. However, her older sister Nadia was a great believer in her work and continued her legacy throughout her very long life. She was one of the main teachers in Europe and taught a massive variety of very influential musicians. Bacewicz was one of her earliest students. Other students of Boulanger's include Daniel Barenboim, Elliot Carter, Aaron Copland, John Eliot Gardiner, Philip Glass, Astor Piazzolla and Virgil Thompson. Bacewicz also studied violin in Paris with the infamous Carl Flesch. He was a very, very strict teacher. Bacewicz actually talks about this, saying that he was so mean and so strict and would barely let her get a few notes out before correcting her already. Some of her earlier works that really gained popularity when she was studying in Paris were her Quintet for Wind and Children's Suite for Piano. She continued with the violin, perhaps more so than composition actually, and when she arrived back in Warsaw, she expected to have a great career, she'd maybe start teaching, she'd already done a lot of concert touring, she'd won competitions, she had just been offered the role as one of the principal violinists of the Polish Radio Symphony Orchestra, and thought, yeah, this is going to be great, career ahead. Wrong. The Second World War had just broken out with dire consequences for those living in Warsaw and elsewhere in Poland. Before long, the Nazis had taken over the whole of Poland, decimating Warsaw in its wake. Bacewicz was forced to leave Warsaw. She was taken to a camp, first in Pruszków and then in Lublin. She should have been taken to a worker camp, but because her sister was injured and she was looking after her very young daughter and elderly mother, she was therefore taken to just a refugee camp where she could continue to care for them. Bacewicz managed to salvage some of her scores from her house. It was during this period that she wrote Overture, one of her earlier orchestral works that helped her raise to fame, alongside her first sonata for solo violin, her second string quartet, and Symphony No. 1. Once war was over, she managed to return to her career as it was going to be, but of course nothing was going to be exactly the same. The Nazis were no longer in charge of Poland. It was now, however, being run by Stalin and the Soviet Party. Poland was now a Russian territory, and everyone living in Poland had to answer to the Russian rule. This had a great effect on the artists, musicians, painters, poets, playwrights. They all had to abide to what was called socialist realism.